Sana was 24 years old and had been working as a customer service agent at a small company in her city for 2 years. And she had, until the Monday morning in early June when her manager stood up at the weekly meeting and made his announcement, considered herself reasonably good at English. She could write a polite email. She could read the local English newspaper. She could, at her office desk, answer a written complaint in careful sentences that her manager praised for their warmth. On paper, her English was competent. The announcement was that the company had signed a contract with a small European partner, and that, in 3 months, all customer service agents would begin taking international calls in English. Sana sat in her chair and did not move for a long moment after the manager had returned to his seat. Around her, her colleagues laughed nervously and made small jokes. She could not laugh. She had not, in her entire 24 years of life, ever understood a native English speaker speaking at normal speed. She did not tell anyone this. She smiled at her manager on her way out of the meeting. She sat down at her desk. She opened her inbox. She stared at the small blinking cursor for a long time. She went home that evening and did what she had always done when she felt behind in a subject. She bought books. She ordered 3 English listening comprehension guides online. She downloaded 4 expensive language apps. She watched a video that promised fluency in 30 days. She sat at her small kitchen table until midnight, filling a notebook with grammar exercises. She woke up the next morning tired and no better at English than she had been the day before. She did this for 3 weeks. Nothing changed. Her written English became slightly more careful. Her spoken English remained locked. She played a 5-minute BBC News clip on her phone one evening as an experiment and understood, by her count, 4 words in the first minute. She turned it off. She sat in her small room and cried for the first time in a long time. Her older cousin Farhan, who worked as a software engineer at an international firm in the capital, and who was one of the few people in her family who spoke English easily in meetings, called her that Sunday. She told him. She had not planned to tell him. She was ashamed. But he had asked her how her week had been, and the whole story had spilled out of her. Farhan was quiet for a long time. Then he said in the gentle voice of an older cousin who had once been in the same place, "Put down the grammar books, Sana. Put down the apps, just for 1 month. Listen instead." She said she did not understand what he meant. He said, "Find something in English that is slow and warm and easy for you. A podcast made for learners. A slow children's audiobook. Anything where you can catch most of the words. Do not stop to look up new words. Do not open a dictionary. Do not test yourself. Just listen. 20 minutes a day for 30 days, then call me back." She was doubtful. She had spent 3 weeks doing serious work, filling notebooks, memorizing verb forms. Now her cousin was telling her to sit quietly and listen to podcasts made for children. It felt like giving up. But she had run out of ideas of her own. She agreed. She began the next morning. She found a small, quiet podcast made for English learners, produced by a woman with a soft voice who spoke slowly and clearly about ordinary things. She listened while she made her tea. She listened while she walked the 10 minutes from her flat to the bus stop. She listened while she waited for the bus. 20 minutes, sometimes 25, that was all. The first week was difficult in a way she had not expected. She did not always understand what was being said. Her old habits kept surfacing. She wanted to pause, to look up words, to test herself, to turn each podcast into homework. Farhan had told her not to. She had to keep telling herself gently that this was not homework. This was only listening. Her job for these 30 days was only to let the sound of English fall on her ears warmly and often. The way rain falls on a garden the gardener has not planted anything specific in yet. By the end of the second week, something small began to change. She noticed, one Wednesday morning while making her tea, that a phrase from the previous evening's podcast had returned to her without translation. It was not a difficult phrase. The speaker had said in her calm voice, "I think the weather is finally changing." Sana had heard it in the evening. She had thought it in her own head that morning in English about her own weather. She stopped stirring her tea. She stood at the kitchen counter for a full minute and felt something small and warm open in her chest that she had not known was still capable of opening. She kept going. Farhan had said 30 days. She was determined to give him 30 full days. In the third week, she experimented with something bolder. She listened to the same podcast episode 3 times over 3 evenings. The first time, she understood roughly half of it. The second time, closer to 70%. The third time, almost all of it. She had not memorized anything. She had not studied anything. She had only heard the same warm sentences on 3 separate evenings, and her brain had, in the small hours between the listenings, quietly done its own work. By the end of the 4th week, she was listening for close to an hour a day. She had added a slow English audiobook to her evening walks. She had started watching the English news, muted with subtitles at first, then briefly with the sound turned on. She was still bad at fast English. She was still lost in most rapid conversations, but she was less lost than she had been. Her ear had begun to hold the language instead of letting it slip. She called Farhan at the end of the 30 days. She told him what had happened. He laughed kindly and said, "Keep going. It only starts to work at day 30. The real change comes at day 60. Trust the boredom of the mornings when nothing seems to be happening. That is when your brain is doing the most work." She trusted him. She kept going. By the end of the 2nd month, her manager stopped her one afternoon in the corridor and said, casually, "Sana, your English feels warmer these days. Have you been practicing something?" She said, "Only listening." He nodded as though this made no sense to him. She smiled and did not explain. By the end of the 3rd month, when the training for the international line began, Sana sat with her colleagues in the small training room. The trainer was a warm Englishwoman from Manchester, whom the company had flown in for 2 weeks. She spoke at natural speed. Half of Sana's colleagues struggled to follow her from the first sentence. Sana followed her, not perfectly. She missed some phrases, she lost some idioms. But she followed the shape of what was being said. And when the trainer asked the room a simple question, Sana was among the first to answer. Her manager noticed. Her colleagues noticed. One of them, a woman of 30 who had studied English at a private school in the capital and who had always seemed to be the most confident English speaker in the office, took Sana aside during a coffee break and asked her quietly how she had done it. She had been struggling with the training in a way she had not expected. She had assumed her old-school English would carry her. It had not. Sana thought for a long moment. She looked at the colleague, who was 6 years older than her and who reminded her, painfully, of the woman she had once been 3 months ago at her small kitchen table. "Put down the grammar books," she said. "Put down the apps. For 30 days, only listen. Find something slow and warm and easy. A podcast, an audiobook, a slow English video, 20 minutes a day. Do not stop to look up words. Do not test yourself. Do not memorize anything. Only listen, every day. Even on the days you feel it is not working, especially on those days." The colleague frowned. "Only listen," she said, "that is all." Sana smiled the small smile of a woman who had learned everything the slow way. "That is all," she said, "and that is everything." 6 months later, Sana was one of the small team who handled the most difficult international calls at her company. Her English was still not perfect. It never would be. But her ear had opened, and once an ear has opened, it stays open. She still listened to a slow English audiobook every night before bed, in the same warm rhythm she had begun 3 months before her first big test, because the habit had come to feel less like study and more like the small, quiet moment at the end of her day when she stopped being a customer service agent and became, again, herself. She sometimes thought of Farhan and of the 15-minute phone call one Sunday evening in early July that had changed the whole shape of her working life. She had gone back to him for help, ashamed. He had given her, in return, a sentence she now carried in her head like a small charm. "Put down the books, just listen. In 30 days you will not recognize the woman you are tonight." She had not, at the time, believed him. Now she did. And she had, without planning to become the older cousin in someone else's story, ready, the next time a younger woman in her office cried quietly,